You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Folks, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we really appreciate all our loyal listeners who listen to many of our episodes. You can go into the library now. There's over 200 episodes, especially now as we have some reemergence. The economy is getting back on its feet, but I think some people are still a little weary of returning to normal and going out and about like we used to. So if you're at home and you're bored, here we are. You can find all 200 episodes. And catch up on trends and unique insights from industry leaders. I'm joined today by, of course, our co-hosts, Matt Priest and Jasmine Pendergrass. How are you guys doing?
Doing great today.
Yeah, I'm doing fine, Andy. Thanks for asking, as always.
Awesome. Today, I guess, there's a lot happening around the world, obviously. One key thing we want to zero in, though, is on China, Matt, because that is obviously where we produce the mass majority of our shoes that are sold in the U.S. And there seems to be it was a tidal wave, and I think now it's just a flood of risk inherent with China and everything that's happening. So I guess, the best thing to do is just jump in and talk a little bit about some things we're hearing from the industry around production in China. Is it moving out of China? What's kind of the risk pool that we're looking at now that's very different in this post-COVID world?
Yeah, that's a great question, Andy. I mean, it's so volatile right now. The relationship is just challenged in so many areas, the relationship between the United States and China, that has a big impact on where we source product. And a lot of our companies continuously are kind of surveying the sourcing landscape, if you will, trying to decide if their sourcing strategies are right, what percentage they are in which countries. And that has been exacerbated over the last few years. And we've talked ad nauseum and on this podcast and in other forums about the U.S.-China trade war and the impact on sourcing and the movement of goods. And there was a time a decade ago, we were close to 90% of U.S. volume was from China as it relates to footwear imports. Now that number is south of 70 and continues to go down. And at one point, it was all, the big impetus was the China trade war, the threat of additional tariffs on imports. And we weathered that storm, and right now, when about half of our imports coming in from China, we have an additional 7.5% tariff on top of what's already paid. So like a sneaker with 20% duty rates, now 27.5% duty rate. And so we've weathered that storm. But then what has happened since then is the continued degradation of the relationship as it relates to the COVID-19 response, the Trump administration's focus on where the virus originated and their critique of the Chinese as it relates to its handling of the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic. And that has then turned towards China's treatment of Hong Kong and from the Trump administration's mind. And I think many in our industry would argue the erosion of autonomy in Hong Kong, a city that has many footwear company, U.S. and European footwear company offices, a city that's enjoyed financial freedom for so long. In fact, it's always at the top of Heritage Foundation's most free economies in the world. And that is all turning very dramatically, very quickly into pressure point after pressure point after pressure point. And so what we have, you couple all that, Andy, with a presidential election year and two candidates who are vying for a block of voters who have continuously for generations been concerned about our relationship with China. And it's just a recipe for volatility, for risk, and for the continuation of uncertainty as it relates to our relationship. And that is just not that's just a strange brew for trying to decide if you're going to source product from China right now. And we've been encouraging our members to look for other sources, and I think they're doing that, but that takes time, as we all know.
Yeah, so I think we should look a little bit at why we were in China to start, and then we can start to peel back some of those layers you talked about, all those different the different concoction of risk that now is China for footwear. But obviously we a lot of production moved into China because there was capital infused in at the time in the 80s and 90s when this really started to build out. It was very cheap. You could build there very cheaply, the factories. You had access to cheap labor, and a lot of it. So you have a lot of migrant workers moving to the coastal regions and filling in. You had material supply chains that grew and are very robust. The workforce, though, of like cheap labor, affordable labor, was very skilled and is very skilled. They're very good at mimicking what they're told. And so the product quality is actually very good when it goes down the production line. You have, you're right near a port, so your speed to market is pretty efficient. So you have all these things, and you start looking at cost, and you look at, capacity, the speed to market, even now where you can fly things in and out of China pretty fast to the US if you need to, if you don't want to take the ship or the boat. So you have all these things is what attracted everybody to China. And then to your point where it grew to almost 90%, because it could grow to 90%. They had the ability to, they had the capacity to, they had the labor to. And then slowly but surely, the cost started to increase, right? So the labor became less affordable. It became a little bit too, in terms of, obviously China has a lot of people, but there was so many industries in China vying for that labor. The labor cost started to increase. So you got electronics, toys, anything and everything around the world that's made has a footprint in some way in China. And so you have people vying for those workers. Prices start increasing. People start looking and dipping the toe in a little bit different places like Vietnam. So that's where the start happened there with athletic, where they're saying, okay, like, can we set up shop here and automate a few things and find some efficiencies? But for all those reasons, we were there and have been there, and people are still finding ways to cut cost. Obviously, now that people are leaving, there is some opportunity to renegotiate prices. So some people are remaining, but Matt, these risks. Let's go through some of those a little bit more and a little bit deeper. I would say the first risk obviously is the trade war. Like you said, we weathered it, right? So we have these tariffs that have been tacked on. People figured out the calculus for that. So that's positive. But then what happens is all of a sudden we see in our supply chain, we see the Chinese government inserting in Uyghurs from the Western provinces. These are traditional Muslim communities that have existed there for many years. The government's mistreated them, in some ways put them in concentration camps, prison camps, work camps, and then we're actually inserting them into some of our factories. So, let's talk a little bit about that really quickly, because I think that's a huge concern. Footwear has done a really good job of going in with, changing our factory footprint and making sure workers are safe. They're getting paid their wages. There's no children working in footwear factories for all our top brands. But then all of a sudden we have this issue where a foreign government is actually doing this. It's not necessarily the factory owners that are doing this for business practice. It's actually being pushed down by the government, right?
Yeah, that's right, Andy. And one of the top ideals or standards or values that our brands and us as an organization has put forward as it relates to sourcing and factory workers is no forced labor, right? So not sourcing from factories that are forcing people to stay in those factories. The workers are forced into the factories by a central government or other kind of institution. And so that's like a tried and true value that we really believe in. And in all honesty, if we weren't in some of these markets, sourcing product wouldn't be as upheld as it is today. And so our global influence as American and European companies is really strong. And the Uyghur issue is heartbreaking. It really challenges our view about how to engage with a people group. And a lot of the time, the factory owners are sent folks under this quote unquote apprenticeship or or skills program or worker development program. And it's not under the auspices of re-education or trying to get the Uyghur community to be less Muslim, if you will. And so trying to equip and ensure that our factories, and I know a number of our brands have instituted this within their protocols, but ensuring that our factories can ascertain and pick up and understand and pick up on the signs of a Uyghur or a Uyghur community coming into a factory group and producing product is really important. And so while the system is not perfect, the employment system is definitely not perfect. Our relationship with China is not perfect. Our relationship with any factory base is not perfect. We are instituting our values in these places, and we are pushing forward and trying to ensure that when we source product, it's done in a reasonable and something that honors the individual and honors the worker. And so that's a tough balance. And we have spent billions of dollars as an industry ensuring that workers are better protected. And it's an ongoing conversation. And that's why we have auditing, and we have unannounced audits, and we have protocols that are constantly being measured. And so I think it's just a wake up call. It goes back to the risks as a whole, Andy, when you are trying to ascertain the unpredictable nature of a relationship with a sourcing country. This goes into that. If there's not rule of law, you kind of run for the hills. If there is mistreatment of workers, you look for other opportunities to source elsewhere. And one of the challenges, even with the trade war, is as kind of settled as that is right now, it's very fragile and it's driven by politics. So even there's an unpredictable nature within our own country and our own government as it relates to the trade policy that impacts our sourcing decisions. So I think everything right now just feels fraught with risk and uncertainty. And our companies that, just like you diversify your stock portfolio in uncertain times, you want to do that, I think, on the sourcing side. So we've been encouraging our members, and it's a lot more work. It's a lot more work to have, less than 50% of your sourcing in China and then divvying it out elsewhere across the landscape. But at the same time, it reduces the risk that we're seeing in places like China. And let's face it, all the things you pointed out, Andy, even before President Trump was elected, we were leaving China pretty quickly. And it had to do with way more to do with economics than political dynamics. And none of those things have really changed in the meantime. And I just think that everything's just fraught with risk. And I think I really encourage the industry to be more proactive in exploring new opportunities to source in countries. And it does, it could be Western Hemisphere, it could be other places in Asia and Southeast Asia, but be more proactive. I think that's a really important message to take away.
Yeah, I also think, in regards to this, it's going to be continually hard when you're working in China to do this, because the government is not going to back off this program of what they're doing with the Uyghurs. They're definitely not going to back off. And at some point, it's good to try to look at identification cards, but at some point, the government may even create fake identification and insert these people in. So it's really difficult to keep a really, you got a well-oiled machine going, but it's hard to keep the ship clean and make sure that you don't have that kind of slave labor in your supply chains. And, to your point, even before that, there was a lot of concern about North Korean labor bleeding over into China, and what that meant for supply chains too. So of course, to your point, there's always risk, but I think the calculation's a lot different when you have a sovereign government creating the risk rather than a factory owner doing it for economics or business practice. It just is a little bit different. Another big thing I think people need to think about too is because of COVID, but also because of the trade war, we see some visa issues now, like Trump's ratcheted up where he is trying to target certain Chinese nationals in the U.S. that are students that may have ties to the PLA, that the military in China, where he's trying to restrict visas for that, and maybe even other purposes. And then in retaliation, the Chinese government's talked about, making visas harder to get for U.S. business people. So there's a bit of tit for tat there. But also in regards to that is we're not quite sure what the sourcing executive footprint is going to look like in China, right? So we have a lot of expats who live in China, who work there or work in Hong Kong. And that's the other issue is with what's happening with Hong Kong right now with the sovereignty question, as China starts to move in more and put its grip on Hong Kong's sovereignty, or at least speed up the process to overtake them and envelop them into China's one policy. But the challenge really is, how do we get our folks into China to make sure the factories are operating appropriately and that the quality and production is what we expect it to be, right? So typically, and I've heard this several times from several executives, there's what's called an American eye, right? So you go into a factory and you make sure that they're making the shoe with the American style in mind, because they would make the shoe completely different because they're Chinese, thinking through a Chinese lens of the marketplace. And the sourcing executives and directors and managers from these brands go in to make sure that they're hitting the exact trends and styles for the U.S. marketplace or European marketplace. But you have to be in the factory making sure they're treating the workers right, they're paying them, making sure the quality is what it needs to be, making sure the orders are getting out on time. You still have to go in and do that. And, Matt, the question remains is, what, through this COVID world, like, when are they going to be able to go back into those factories in China if they're going to get access to it because of visa issues? And then also just, what the transactions may look like, because I know that some people use banks in Hong Kong to, make payments for materials or for goods or for final product, right?
Yeah. As you're kind of laying all this out, Andy, it just, again, it's like another variable thing that's swirling out there that's kind of out of our control. In fact, as we're taping this, it's June 3rd. It just was announced the U.S. Department of Transportation has ceased all incoming and outgoing Chinese airlines coming to and from the U.S. and to China. Because they haven't approved our airlines yet. And so there's this pause in travel. There's this pause in engagement. You can't go into the country. Visas are being revoked, and people have to reapply. The president's announcement in the Rose Garden about the change in status for the economic change in status for Hong Kong will have an impact. These are decisions that aren't just kind of talking points on a White House memo that's released. American companies will start to think, you know what? There's no benefit right now to being in Hong Kong from a tax perspective, right. Even from production. Some product gets altered in Hong Kong and becomes a product of Hong Kong because there's a duty benefit there because of 301, and that's going to change. So Hong Kong will have 301 duties placed on top of it. And so people are looking at, do we go to Singapore? Do we set up shop in Eastern Europe? Where do we go to kind of meet the needs of our base in the Asia territory? And the variables are just innumerable at this point, and the headlines just come fast and feverishly. And so I just think that there are quite a few companies. They have standards of sourcing, they have plans to execute, and they're executing against those plans. And some are just kind of putting their heads in the sand, crossing their fingers, and hope the headlines don't change more dramatically than they already have. And I just think you have to be really diligent. You have to be looking at places. And even right now, you can't go to Vietnam. You can't go to some of these locations because of COVID. But you can connect with people. And we've actually been connecting people over Zoom for the last few weeks. And then we're going to have a big sourcing event later in July starting the 27th, that's really going to get people connected. Just looking at global shoe sourcing. So I think in spite of all the doom and gloom, uncertainty, we are an innovative industry, and we're finding ways to do it, whether it's line reviews over digital platforms, or it's connecting with suppliers over Zoom, or it's working through FDRA to make connections. It's kind of an all of the above approach. And I'm an optimistic kind of guy typically, so I don't want for people to listen to this and feel the need to go curl up in the fetal position in the corner. I want people to be empowered, which I think we try to do, Andy. And so I think there are options to create certainty and to be more intentional and to do it in an effective way.
Yeah, I agree. We're not trying to have doom and gloom, but there needs to be an awareness as to why things are shifting. Yep. And what inherent risk is there. And I think these are things that are bubbling up that some of the top brands know about. I mean, they have like people who are on top of political issues and political risks just as much as the economic risks, and the calculus. So, but there's a lot. I would say I would argue the majority oftentimes don't see they'll see the headlines and they'll worry a little bit, but they might not see some of the stuff that's happening on the ground as well, or not anticipate it until it does happen. And so this is kind of a warning bell where it's like, I don't see the risk decreasing in China in the short term.
Right.
I don't know if you feel the same way, but I just don't. Yep. I think this is the big thing for me, because I've been studying China for many years and my master's was on their foreign policy and domestic policy, but I see their risk calculus completely changing. When you see them begin to become more emboldened with Hong Kong, I think they're with the COVID happening in China and shutting everything down, they're almost like at a restart point where they're saying, why do we need to keep building up the soft good industries when we really want to transition to high tech, right? So I think, if you have a struggling footwear factory owner or group, you're not going to see as much support from the government as you had in the past, because they're going to transition that focus to electronics or AI or robotics or anything like that. So, right. So the funding and the kind of government backing to some of these industries to keep people employed like they were in the past just aren't going to be there either. So, so to Matt's point, everyone can go to learn about our global shoe sourcing digital kind of series that we're doing online, since we can't do any physical events this year. And many brands don't have budget to travel, but everyone from around the world can go to shoesourcingsummit.com. It's shoesourcingsummit.com. You can register. It's very affordable. We're going to do it over 4 days, and we'll be doing deep dives just like this on every single country out there and doing analysis. We'll have data sets. We'll have experts join us. We'll have sourcing executives join us, sharing their insights. And this is really the time to have a robust thought about what your sourcing footprint's going to be in the next 5 years, because you got to start to pivot now. And in the same way, I do want to let people know there is also going to be a digital material show. So instead of having the physical material show that we normally have in Portland and in Boston in August and late July, that's going to pivot to an online event where the material show will be partnering with Material Exchange to put on a show where material suppliers from around the world can find brands and connect with them and show them their new materials online, connecting with the Material Exchange platform where the brands can then see all the specs and see all the audits and certificates and all that stuff all in one place, which is pretty amazing. But Matt, too, I think when we talk a lot about the end product, but the same way our material supply chains are also have a lot of inherent risk in them right now. I mean, we saw that with COVID, where maybe 30, if you're sourcing in Bangladesh or Vietnam or Cambodia, you had a hard time wondering if you were going to get some of those materials in time to keep the factory production going, right?
That's right, Andy. And I think some of that's starting to reopen back up. And in fact, we've kind of talked about it, how as things were starting to shut down here, things were starting to open back up on the Asia side, and access to materials and raw materials and that kind of thing. And so that's the irony, is that when demand dried up, we were starting to reopen. But again, it's more and more than ever, you need a digital platform to manage the complexity of where everything's coming from and how you're assembling those pieces and those materials and the footwear people want to buy. And if you are diversifying out and you're growing if you're kind of shrinking the depth of your sourcing and spreading it more thinly across a multitude of countries, expanding your breadth, then you're going to need these digital tools and assets to help you manage that in an effective way, for sure.
Yeah, I think that before COVID, I think it was seen as something that could help optimize things a little bit and say, okay, this could be helpful here and here. I'll see what's happening. We'll dip our toe in and see on the Material Exchange or any other digital platforms. And now with the way our budgets are going to be constrained, and unfortunately the way, we've seen personnel being cut, unfortunately, in our industry, which is sad to see. But when that happens, there's no other choice but to automate some of the processes through these digital platforms like Material Exchange that can help you become more compliant, more innovative at less cost by using some of these things. So, but again, I do want to let people know, you can go to fdra.org and look at our events calendar. to stay plugged into things around sourcing, around, retail, any number of things. We're constantly doing webinars and digital events to help keep our industry updated on the trends as they occur. And you can find out more about the digital material show on FDRA.org and access that too. I think we've talked a lot about the risk that's inherent in things, but there's also a lot of opportunity right now because this is the time when you can actually rethink everything. There's a pause that gives you a moment to really say, do we really, what's our risk tolerance in our footprint? What are the options and opportunities? And that really is why we're doing this global shoe sourcing digital series to help people think things through a lot better in terms of political risks, social risks, economic risks, but also the opportunities as we have sourcing executives who will come on and really kind of share what their strategy is, what their thinking is as they go forward in this kind of new world that we're starting to build in places like Bangladesh and Cambodia, and places most people haven't really considered or now looking at, but they need some of that SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that we're going to provide on this series. So definitely sign up for that. With that, I'm gonna pivot ourselves over to Jasmine. Jasmine, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Andy.
Good. So let's do something on trends. Let's do a footwear fashion and focus segment on what's happening out there. I know things are starting to heat up outside. We're starting to see some 90s across the country pop up. So I guess I'll ask you straight up, for summertime when we're all still kind of isolating, and we're super casual at this point, are slides still going to be the biggest thing in summer where, as far as a sandal, is a slide going to be it?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think it'll be interesting to kind of see where, like, once we're outside a little bit more than normal, what everyone has on their feet. But for what I've been seeing so far, just how Crocs were getting really popular, especially because it was like known as the number one, safety shoe during this time. People have incorporated it into their closets as like a fashion statement as well. Not that Crocs wasn't already on that kind of direction of just becoming more fashionable, but I think also being like a protective and a safety shoe during this time has definitely given it more light. So I think people are definitely starting to own more pair of Crocs. I think Uggs has a slipper shoe that you can kind of basically wear outside. That comes in all these nice and crazy colors that I'm seeing a lot of women wear. So I think the brands that have really focused on comfort will be winning in the spring and summertime. Like, the Teva outdoor sandals and like Uggs and Crocs, I think we'll continue to see more of those and more color combinations as well.
Right. And Birkenstock too. I mean, Birkenstock's
yeah. There's a list of them. There are members of FDRA. There's definitely a list of brands that I think will really benefit from having that comfort, easy to put on kind of shoe.
Basically, if you're a member of FDRA, you're going to do just fine. If you're not, then you don't know where you're going to be at. One thing I did see, I'm a big LinkedIn person, and anybody out there who wants to LinkedIn me can follow my pontifications about the future that are often wrong, but at least are thoughtful. But I saw D Wells post something, I don't know, it was about a month ago or something like that. Our friend D, who's been on the show before, but he posted something really interesting where Converse was actually creating shoes without like the backs, right? So it's almost like a slide where it's like a slipper where you put your foot in, but it's still like Converse Chucks. And he was talking about when he was growing up, like people would just smush down the back of the Chucks and just wear them, like that. And now they're just making them like that. And I think that's kind of a sign of this casualization of what shoes may look like, coming out in some forthcoming seasons that are a little bit easier to put on like a slipper rather than kind of lacing up. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm surprised that they haven't, because slides have become so popular in the recent, I don't know, I would say more like 5-6 years. They've become really, really popular. I'm surprised that they haven't explored something like that. But Converse has like a lot of variations of their shoes and like doing like a clear shoe and things like that. So I think they've been headed to that direction, but something to easily put on, I'm not surprised. And I don't know if I will wear them or not, but I'll be interested to see what they look like on someone else's foot before I purchase.
Yeah, I hear that. Matt, last word on the trends. What do you think?
I think if you're kind of a mid-tier fashion brand right now, you're probably a little concerned. And if you are in athleisure and in comfort and in outdoor, you're feeling pretty good. We're seeing increased sale. We're seeing lower foot traffic as stores open up, but higher conversion rates and higher average sale per consumer. So the shoppers out there are on a mission. Casual shopping is gone right now. And again, if you're summertime, comfort, relaxation, not going out to some party kind of thing, then you're in a good spot. And it'll be interesting to see how long that lasts.
Righto. Folks, thank you for listening. This is the Shoe and Show. You can find us at shoeandshow.com. Please rate us. You can find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're on every single audio platform. Thanks to our wonderful team at Human Factor and our great producers for helping us constantly put our content up where people are listening. Share it with a friend. Pass this around. Let your colleagues know. This is the Footwear Industries podcast. Again, you can go back to our full catalog. But we thank you guys for listening. I want to thank our partners in crime, Jasmine and Matt, for joining us today and having conversations around these industry topics. If you have an idea for a show or a topic you would like to hear us discuss, or if you have an expert that you would like us to have come on and talk about something in particular that can help you in your business, let us know. This is what this show is all about. But again, thank you so much. And until next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.